Welcome to Chapter 1, Section 1. In this section we're going to talk about what a database actually is. And this may seem like an obvious answer, especially if you have experience with MySQL or any other kind of database. But the reason that I want to start with this is because the term database, it can actually be very vague and it can mean different things to different people. Alright, so the bottom line, the simple, dumbed down definition of a database is an ordered collection of data. Okay, so that doesn't have to be MySQL. It doesn't even have to be a relational database with tables. You could actually have a notepad file with data in that, and that would actually be a flat database. Alright, so it doesn't have to look like MySQL. Usually when people say the word database, they tend to mean one or more of these three things. And these things are the data, which is the actual data itself, numbers, strings, dates, whatever. The database management system, also called a DBMS, and that is what MySQL is. PostgreSQL, MariaDB, there's a whole bunch of them. That can also be referred to as the database. And then sometimes people might mean the database application, which is the, we could say PHPMyAdmin or MySQL Workbench, just an interface that you use to interact with the data in that database. Okay, so I don't think, in my personal opinion, I don't think that any of these are right or wrong. They could all, in fact, be called the database, in my opinion. Alright, so what I want to talk about is database management systems, which are also called DBMS. And that's what MySQL is. There's a whole bunch of them. A DBMS is software that's designed to model data and provide interaction with a user. Alright, so we can interact with a database management system usually through a command line as well as GUI tools. Alright, so we could actually use something like PHPMyAdmin, which we'll learn about later, where we can create databases and tables and all that. Alright, so data is normally stored in one or more files. These are just some quick facts about DBMSs. Data is usually stored in tables. Alright, so tables contain rows and columns, and this can look much like an Excel spreadsheet or another spreadsheet program where you have headings, which would be the columns, and then you have rows of data. Alright, and that's looked at as a table. Data can be cross-referenced among tables. Alright, and this is true if it's a relational database. And we're going to be talking about relational databases more in this section, so I don't want to get too deep into that. But basically you can relate one or more tables together. And MySQL is probably the most popular relational database that's available. Here are some other popular database management systems. Alright, we have MySQL, obviously. PostgreSQL I've used and is very similar to MySQL in my opinion. SQLite is a little different. You don't actually have a system. It's actually pretty much just a bunch of files, and it's really light. Obviously, that's why it's called SQLite. Microsoft SQL Server, which is pretty much Microsoft's version of one of these, of MySQL. Oracle, which is a big name in relational databases. And over here we have systems that I personally have not used. Alright, we have SAP, FoxPro, DBase, and MariaDB. And I can't tell you too much about these because I've never used them. But these are just some of the popular management systems that are available. Alright, so I just put together an extremely simple table that you would see inside of a relational database. And like I said, we will be going into this more. We'll create more more complicated and in-depth tables, but this is a simple table for, let's say, a customer management system. All right, so you might have a database called My Store. All right, and in that database you have a bunch of tables, and you have a users table. All right, so that's what this is. This is the users table inside of the My Store database. Now inside of the users table you have columns, or sometimes called fields, and in this example these fields are ID, first name, last name, and email. And when you create your tables and your columns, you should generally use either this kind of format with lowercase with an underscore separating words, or use camel case, which would be starting with a lowercase, and then the second word would have a capital, and then the third word would have a capital, and so on. So much like JavaScript syntax. And then inside of those columns you have rows, or sometimes called records, or just data. It's the actual data. All right. So in this table we have 3 users. So we have 3 rows which obviously have an ID, first name, last name, and email. All right. So that's a very dumbed down example of what a table is. Alright, so interacting with the database, we can do this with what's called a client. Alright, when you install MySQL, it's actually a server. It's a database server, and you can use clients to connect to that database, whether it's locally or remote. And you can do many different things. This is just an example of some common actions that you can run against a database. You could define data, or the actual database and the data inside it. You can create data, you can select certain data, run queries, which does all of this really. You can run select queries, insert, update, delete. Alright, so we can do those things as well. And we can do this to single fields, we can do this to a clump of fields, we can do this to the table, to a column name, all kinds of things. So we can basically do whatever we want with that data. Alright, and the way that we do that in MySQL is through SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language. And what it is, it's a special purpose language that allows developers to interact with the data in a database. Alright, so all those things that we just went over, we'll do that through this structured query language. It's based on relational algebra and tuple relational calculus, which I'm not really familiar with. I'm obviously familiar with SQL, but I've never dealt with this relational calculus, so I can't tell you too much more about that. Data definition, and it's a data definition and data manipulation language, and we can perform a lot of different operations, but the most popular being create, read, update, and delete. Alright, and that's for short called CRUD. And let's say you have a blog and you have a post table. Now you'll be able to create posts, alright, to insert into your blog. Read, obviously your blog or website will display the data in the blog to read. You can update a post, and you can also delete a post. Alright, so every resource we create, or every table we create in a database, we can run these operations on. Alright. Common database models. So first we have relational databases, which is the most popular type of database. Obviously MySQL is a relational database. We have object-oriented databases where everything is represented as an object. Object relational databases, distributed databases. We have NoSQL databases like MongoDB. These are much different than MySQL and relational databases. Basically, you don't have to define a schema. It's very lightweight, not as strict, but there's certain things that you don't want to use this type of database for. For instance, if you have an application that performs a lot of different queries and calculations, then you'd want to use something like MySQL. I haven't used these NoSQLs too much. I do have some experience with MongoDB, but that's about it. I haven't used any other ones. Multimedia databases to hold images and videos and all that. Flat database, which is basically just a file. Alright, so you could have just files with data in them. Network database and hierarchical databases. And I haven't used some of these, so I can't really elaborate on them, but basically we'll be focusing on relational databases. Alright, so that's it for just a basic summary of what a database actually is. So in the next video we'll talk about MySQL in general and what it does, what it can offer us, and what it can be used for.